Hello, I'm Pete Lockett. Welcome to the final part 6 of Pop Go the Bongos. So we're going to be looking at some different patterns today. Some patterns that you find mainly on congas that are kind of transposed for bongos. So in the congas we have what's called the heel tip technique, where the hand plays the heel and the tip of the fingers. Now, of course, with the bongos we have the thumb fingertip technique. So it kind of makes sense to maybe see how some of those patterns found on the congas can be employed on the bongos. And the basic tumbao pattern, which is heel tip, slap tip, heel tip, open, open, we can begin to use, instead of the heel tip, we can have the thumb fingertips. So this type of configuration, which kind of sounds quite cool and quite different on the bongos. You never hear it actually. So you've got heel, thumb, tip, slap, tip. It's a slap. We've got the muted thumb stroke. That's the first part. Thumb, tip, right, tip. Then the second part. Thumb, tip, open, open. Thumb, tip, open, open. Now with the congas, actually you'd be leading with the right hand. The heel and the tip would be happening with the right hand for most right-handed players. So we're reversing it so it kind of opens up different potentials. We've been able to get to the large bongo, and of course we're used to playing the thumb and the tip with our left hand, so it makes sense to kind of reverse the whole structure. So the second part of the rhythm is the same, apart from we're going to add 2 open tones on the large bongo. So the second part of the rhythm will be Now the difficulty here is when at a faster tempo you go from this stroke with the right hand to 2 notes with the right hand. So let's look at the whole pattern. Example 1. 3, 4 and. So anyone who's familiar with the congas would recognise that pattern, very clearly. The other thing that's important is kind of actually works well with the bongos, that is, corresponds to what happens on the congas, is that the heel of the conga pattern, it kind of becomes like a kind of bass, it's kind of a muted bass tone, and if you kind of accent the thumb, it kind of does the same job. So you really hear those on-beat thumb strokes. Now there are lots and lots of different variations of the tumbao and different structures of the way that's configured with the heel tip action and motion. So let's look at another different example, and this is example 2. 3, 4, and. So here we see, in the whole of that rhythm, there's only 2 thumb strokes. So we're going left, left with the fingertips. And then that pushes the open tone on the low drum and the open tone on the high drum onto the offbeat, which kind of gives it an interesting feel. Then the second half of the rhythm is the regular timbale fill. So now we're going to move on to another rhythm that is quite commonly found on bongos. This is called the bolero. Now this is actually the 2/4 sort of Cuban bolero rather than the 3/4 Spanish bolero that sometimes the terms get confused. Now, this is kind of a slowish type of rhythm, and it involves a little sort of rough with the left hand. And the rhythm sounds like this: 3, 4, and. As the regular martillo, with the rough, but it's not a rough martillo. Now the rough consists of, starting with the right hand, it's actually harder slower than it is fast. So if you were to think of just a single with the left hand, it will be. But that single note becomes the little 3-stroke rough. Now we can also add the double note on the open drum. On the larger drum, as we did in one of the earlier martillo variations, which was. So you see that with the double, we have the thumb as well. Now with the rough bolero style, 3, 4. Well, that's a specific rhythm that you would find on the bongos, the bolero, example 3. But let's move on to another rhythm that is found more commonly on the congas, and we'll transpose that onto the bongos. Now, it's kind of a style of Mozambique. There are so many different styles of Mozambique. It's it's difficult to pin it down exactly, but it's kind of a Mozambique style rhythm. It sounds like this: 3, 4. So that's a really cool sounding groove. Really, really useful, and it has a lot of applications. And also, as with all the things that we've looked at in many of the lessons, they're springboards really to, you know, move into different areas and ways to improvise and do different stuff outside of any specific idiom. Now, what we need to do first of all with that type of rhythm is to look at the actual sticking, because it's unlike the rhythms that we've been looking at before that have been continuous sixteenths. This is more of a broken type pattern where there are gaps of 16th notes that aren't played. So the sticking, 3, 4, and. So we can see that that's written clearly in example 4, the sticking. Get it together on one sound source first. Get the feel of it, the lilt of it, the way it moves, and then begin to orchestrate it on the different sounds, which will sound like this. 3, 4, and. And we can also play it the other way round. So at the moment we're starting with in the first bar and in the second bar. So it could be like this. There are, of course, lots of other ways to approach the instrument. If we look at example 5, we see a very simple kind of backbeat type approach where we've got the 2 and the 4 and of each bar on slap strokes and open tones. We also have the open bass bongo tone on the downbeat, on 1. So far we haven't really looked at that type of concept at all. Primarily because a lot of the way that the rhythms work with bongos in a traditional setting kind of leads to them being on the 4 or on the push or different places. It's not really the same concept as having kick on 1 and snare drum on 2, kick on 3, snare drum on 4. It's kind of a different type approach. If anything, it's kind of the opposite, a little bit like Brazilian, in that you'll be leading with the high notes and having the bass tones normally off the beat. So here's this kind of simple pop type approach to a bongo pattern. 3, 4, and. So you can see that the potential of the instrument is absolutely fantastic. It's such a great sounding drum. It kind of cuts through pretty much all musical situations you can imagine. It's so staccato, it's so sharp and so decisive in its tone. It amazes me that more people don't focus on this instrument as the cornerstone of their percussion set up, tending to, especially with pop players, moving towards bongos and congas, and larger drums. For me, I absolutely love the bongos, and it's really an instrument that deserves a mass exposure, a lot more exposure within idioms of music outside of the traditional, as well as of course as the amazing bongo players you hear within the traditional music of Cuba and also other Latin music. So I hope you've found this enjoyable, this series Pop Go the Bongos, and Hope to see you again soon. Maybe for some didgeridoo. No. Maybe jaw harp. No. Okay. Email me in what you want next.